Hello and welcome to another Motors.co.uk new car review. The car we're going to be looking at today is the new Audi e-tron Sportback, but before we dive in and find out what it's like, please remember to subscribe to the Motors.co.uk YouTube channel, like this video, and remember to hit that bell icon so that you get notified each and every time we upload a new video. Audi has an exceptional talent for filling a niche and creating a car and putting it in its lineup where you might not think one would fit. And that's what we've got here. We've got the new e-tron Sportback. It's essentially a swoopier, curvier version of Audi's regular e-tron. It does use a cutting-edge electric powertrain though, and is packed with technological features. So let's take a closer look at this latest Sportback. As we've already mentioned, the Sportback is a far more raked car in terms of designs than the standard e-tron. Look towards the back of the car and you'll see that the roofline has been angled quite aggressively, tapering into a short, stubby boot. The regular e-tron hallmarks are still here though. The closed-off grille, for instance, is still present and correct, though new touches such as these jazzy orange brake calipers help to make the e-tron even more noticeable out on the road. Now, if you thought the outside of the e-tron looked quite space-age, then there's another thing again when you come inside. It's dominated by screens here. We've got 5 in total, so we've got a top screen for media and navigation, we've got a bottom screen for heating and ventilation, we've got the driver's display, which shows you all your usual controls, and then we've got 2 camera screens which take the place of your usual mirrors. Let's talk about those cameras a little bit more, because they are really cool. So, mounted on the side, it projects an image to the inside of the car, and it's a clear one at that, and it's really good in heavy rain. One thing is, it just takes a little bit of getting used to, but you can't deny that it's just such an exceptionally cool feature to have in your car. Elsewhere, things are pretty much as we've become used to from Audi. This dual screen setup is the same one that we've seen in cars like the A6 and the A7, and that means it gets haptic feedback and it's really responsive. It's great to look at, and it incorporates Apple CarPlay as well, so if you are connecting your phone, then it's really easy to do so. You also get this nice floating gear selector which frees up a little bit of space. You've also got a nice deep pocket and nice deep door bin, so Audi hasn't forgotten about practicality either. One of the best aspects of the e-tron Sportback is how impressively practical it is. There's 615 litres of boot space, which rises to 1,665 litres when the back seats are folded flat. Plus, because of the high opening boot, it's easy to access. So what is the e-tron like out on the road then? For starters, it is superbly refined. That electric powertrain means that you're getting no engine noise whatsoever, and so for wafting around town and driving at lower speeds, it's really relaxing, and you can just tell how quiet it is in here. It's quite amazing actually. The ride is somewhat fidgety. That could be down to the large wheels that this car is on. And even in comfort modes, there's a certain amount of bump through from the wheels into the cabin, and that does disturb that overall feeling of comfort. You could change this by optioning a slightly smaller wheel with a little bit more tyre, and so if you are after the best levels of comfort possible, then this is something we would definitely recommend. Because of the way the bonnet smooths off, it can be quite hard to judge where your corners are. In a traditional SUV, you feel like you've got quite big, boxy edges to the car, but that's different in the e-tron, and that means that judging where your extremities are can be a little bit difficult. Particularly if you're coming from a smaller vehicle into the e-tron, you'll notice its size. Placing it on the road isn't too difficult, but then again, just because of the sheer size of the thing, it feels like on country lanes like the ones we're on today, it can feel a little bit large. You get used to it over time though. Then we've got the cameras, and this is again one of those things that you really have to get used to, but once you're up and running, you kind of wonder how you existed without them. Now I will admit that for an additional £1,300, they're not entirely worth it. They are a gimmick because essentially they replace mirrors which work rather well anyway. It does take a certain level of getting used to because you're constantly looking at the place where you expect the mirrors to be, and then you have to readjust to look down to see the screens. I can say, however, that they work brilliantly in heavy rain, and that's an area where I thought that they would really falter. Equally at night, they work quite well. There's no sense of night vision or anything like that, so it doesn't give you any more feedback than a traditional mirror would, but they are nice and clear. One thing it does do though is somewhat distort your sense of space. So if you look in one of these mirrors or screens and you see a space behind you, there's a good chance that it'll appear larger than it actually is. And then you've got the performance. Anyone who hasn't driven an EV yet, I would heartily recommend to go out and test drive one, simply for the way they accelerate. Even base level EVs feel far more eager to get off the line than their petrol and diesel equivalents, and that's certainly the case in the e-tron. The performance in the e-tron is excellent. The fact that it's got two motors at the front and the rear axle give it plenty of shove off the line. So press your foot to the floor, wheels straight, and yep, there's a real sense of urgency there that you just don't get in other cars. It's not as sharp as in other EVs like the Tesla, for instance, or even the Polestar 2. Audi has addressed this by introducing a new S version which will have 3 motors powering it, and that gives it some pretty ludicrous acceleration figures. However, compared to most usual diesel and petrol SUVs, the e-tron by far outguns them. When it comes to this Sportback version, that sloping rear roof does mean that your rearward visibility is impeded somewhat, but looking forward you've got a great view of the road ahead. You've got quite slim pillars which don't obstruct your view too much. Overall, it feels just like a really nice Audi SUV to drive, and that's something that I think most people who are making the switch from a petrol or diesel into an EV will appreciate. It integrates quite well into your life without making too many changes or sacrifices. And behind the wheel we've got, well, they're not gear shift paddles. They're actually paddles that control the amount of regeneration you get. And you get into the swing of them pretty quickly. So for instance, if you're coming up to a roundabout or a junction, you can flick the paddle and that gives you more regen and slows the car down. By doing so, of course, you're recouping some of the energy that you'd otherwise be losing through the process of deceleration. So by doing this, you're actually adding more charge to the battery. It also means that you don't actually need to go near the brake pedal too often, because you can slow the car down simply by adjusting the amount of regen you get through the pedals. If you're after an EV which will seamlessly integrate itself into your life, then the Audi e-tron Sportback could be that car. It's as comfortable, as nice to drive, and as practical as a regular SUV, but it has that added benefit of having a future-proof electric powertrain. Now, there are plenty of questions still arising around EVs in general, but I think that the e-tron actually puts a lot of these to bed. It has a decent range and a decent charge rate, and overall it's just one of those cars that you don't really think about as having a strange new powertrain. In short, if you're looking for an EV which doesn't really feel like an EV, then the e-tron Sportback should be firmly on your list. Now, thank you for watching this latest Motors.co.uk new car review, and if you'd like to see some similar video reviews on some of the e-tron's main rivals, then click the links coming up next.